So there will be a video after. There she is.
Here I am.
Hey.
Were you able to hear me at all?
Yes, I was actually trying to help Eric log in, and in the process logged myself out of the backstage and didn't realize it. So sorry.
Got it. I only have a minute, so just that icon you see on the top left says live via RTMP. That's letting you know a video is playing out to the audience right now. So when it just goes into a red live by itself, that's your cue to start talking. Same thing when y'all wrap up the panel. I'm gonna have to start another video to play right after y'all. So it's gonna take 10 to 15 seconds. It's gonna be awkward, but it's gonna take 10 to 15 seconds for that video to kick in. So it's gonna be a lot of fake smiling and holding until you see the live via RTMP again.
Okay.
So right now we're waiting for the live via RTMP to just go to a red live. And then at the end, you're gonna wait for the live to go back to live via RTMP. So just keep smiling until you see that icon. But I'm sending y'all on in 5 seconds. And I'm sorry, we're gonna be in the chat also. So on the right-hand side, just we'll be seeing questions, audience questions, all in the chat on the right-hand side.
And when those should we wrap up in time to address some of those? Is that expectation?
I believe so. That's what all the panelists are doing.
And I'll see them, and it'll be up to me to say we've got a question from the panel about X.
Yes, just keep it here in the backstage chat, and we'll see those questions from the audience here. All right, thank you.
Thank you.
So once again, just look for the red live, because as soon as I leave off camera, I'm gonna start it.
Okay.
Thanks, Celia, for all your help too.
Thanks. I'm glad you got on. So we're just waiting for that blinking live to just become solid.
I think it is live.
We're live right now?
Yep.
Okay, wonderful. Well, thank you to all of the listeners out there for inviting Feeding Texas to join this conference today and share the impact that COVID has had on our food banks and the people we serve, and talk to you about the challenges we faced and the lessons we learned and what that means moving forward. And we're going to focus specifically not just on sort of the impact on the charitable food supply, but also on the role of government programs, the federal nutrition programs, and really how we worked alongside to advocate for public policy flexibility and greater federal investment and what that really means for public policy around food insecurity moving forward. So I've got the good fortune today to be with three of our finest food bank leaders from around the state. There are 21 food banks in the Feeding Texas network, and collectively they serve every county of the state. But I've got here with me today Eric Cooper, who's the president and CEO of the San Antonio Food Bank. I've got Catherine Byers, who's the government relations officer for the Houston Food Bank. And I've got Beth Corbett, who is the Director of Advocacy and Public Policy for your own Central Texas Food Bank. And if I forgot to introduce myself, I'm Celia Cole, and I'm the CEO of Feeding Texas, the state network. So we're going to jump right in, and my first question goes to Catherine. And I'd like you, Catherine, to just talk about sort of the health and economic crisis that impacted your communities. What did you see? How did you respond? What kinds of changes did you see in the people seeking assistance?
Sure. So a little context, the Houston Food Bank serves an 18-county region. Part of that is Harris, which, as y'all know, is the largest county in Texas. Pre-pandemic, we were serving a large number of people, certainly 9,500 households a week, and doing about 400,000 pounds of food a week. If you looked at January of 2020 to April of 2020, after things were really in full motion with the pandemic, we had a 102% increase in the average number of households served each week. From March to December, the average number of households we served per week was about 134,000. And over that time period, that's 16 million people. And the people who were coming were certainly those who were struggling with food insecurity pre-pandemic, But we saw a huge increase in the number of people who had never, ever come to a food bank before, and really were quite shocked that they were in those lines. We estimate that over the number of people, that the millions of people that we've served, a good 40 to 50% of those are new. So we certainly have those who are returning, who have an ongoing need, but we have a lot of people who are recognizing every week that they are in dire need of making sure that they can put food on their table.
Thanks, Catherine. So I know that one of the most important things that food banks did from the very get-go was jump right in and be available to people who are experiencing sort of sudden crisis. And you all did that while we were waiting for Congress to figure out the right kind of aid to send to states. But they did, and that came in the form of economic stimulus payments direct to people, and increased investments in unemployment insurance. So talk a little bit about that, Beth, and just how putting cash into people's hands also mitigated the impact and the need at food banks. You're muted.
Now I'm unmuted.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's good to be here, and I'm sure behind the scenes there are folks that I know from Austin here joining us. So thank you. I think to piggyback on a little bit of what Catherine said, in thinking about this question, Celia, I think about pre-COVID, the clients we were serving. I think it's important for people to understand, the majority of our clients are working households. The majority of people coming to food banks before this pandemic, well, almost the majority in our region don't qualify for federal nutrition assistance programs. They can't get SNAP and WIC and others. And so, seeing this major surge as folks were losing their jobs and navigating this whole thing, our numbers, I think, were comparable to Houston's. We're not quite as big in terms of population, but, saw the similar increases. And I can't imagine what they would have been had there not been, those provisions in the CARES Act, related to unemployment insurance, the stimulus checks that went out to households. I kind of shudder to think of what the lines would have looked like, had those provisions not been in place. And the other thing that your question kind of makes me think about is, I think we also saw that initial surge in April, May, and then I won't say things decreased, but things kind of leveled off a little bit over the summer as far as need. And then our food bank in particular saw a huge record-breaking demand again in November. And, y'all correct me if you disagree with this perspective, but I would suspect a lot of that had to do with uncertainty about, the next stimulus package, uncertainty about whether or not those, unemployment insurance, benefits were going to be extended. Just a lot of uncertainty about what the government was going to do next and what that next round of funding might look like. And I think that probably contributed in large part to that big surge we saw again in the fall.
So pivoting over to Eric now, and thinking about uncertainty, I know the pandemic and how it affected sort of the overall food supply created a lot of uncertainty for food banks in terms of trying to figure out how to manage the various commodity streams coming in. I know the Emergency Food Assistance Program, or TFAP, which is a primary source of support for food banks all the time, not just during pandemics, played an important role. But there was also a pandemic box program set up a few months in. And so how did all of that, the flow of those various commodities and the government response really kind of play into your planning and service delivery?
Well, Celia, as was mentioned, food banks across the United States that are part of Feeding America saw this unprecedented demand. And firsthand here in Texas with the 20 Feeding Texas food banks, all of us saw double the demand. But as we source our food, typically it's through donations. We're sourcing from the field to the fork. Every link of the food chain, our Feeding Texas food banks are working with farmers and growers to get fresh produce. We're working with manufacturers and wholesalers on dry and frozen and refrigerated products. There's some creative strategy to get wild game through Hunters for the Hungry. Most people know food banks for residential food collections and food drives, even picking up from restaurants, hotels, caterers. I mean, prepared food that was left over, food banks are rescuing. But when you think of the onset of COVID-19, it was that food service side of the food industry, restaurants, hotels, and caterers that were closing down. And so with their closures, there actually was a reduction in what was being donated to food banks. At the retail side, many of the food banks across the state are picking up from great grocery retailers like H-E-B, and they were selling out of food. I mean, they were seeing those record numbers of customers coming in and buying that food. And you can imagine now that offset. So the demand is doubling while your supply is actually shrinking. That left a lot of food banks very anxious that we were going to run out of food. And, through amazing advocacy throughout the state, your leadership, Celia, and an intervention from the governor and the Texas Department of Emergency Management, that influx of dollars to be able to now purchase food. And for many food banks, this was the first time we've had that level of support to buy food in a supply chain that was actually fairly broken and disrupted. So sourcing that food became very, very difficult. I mean, even though we had dollars, you couldn't find the food to be able to even buy. And grocery retailers were in the same boat. I know for many of us food banks, we at points had to resort to buying gift cards because you could get food at H-E-B, but I couldn't get a semi-truckload of food. And so it wasn't until kind of early summer that we started to see the supply chain starting to kind of stabilize, and for us to be able to get the inventories in that we needed. And as you mentioned, that's really then when the federal government, through the Emergency Food Assistance Program, some of those supports started to come in directly to food banks. The Farm to Families Food Box Program started to come into play in May. And so that federal support, along with the local private support, is really what bridged the gap. Now, will we have enough to continue to serve at this unprecedented level? I think that's what's in the back of the minds of all food bankers. I mean, it's been unprecedented, the flow and the demand, but we're just trying to hold on to see if we can keep the food coming.
Well, Eric, quick follow-up question. New Congress, new administration, given everything you've seen and learned in the past 11 months, and thinking about aid directly for food banks, what would be your top ask of the new Congress and the new administration?
Well, obviously, with this stimulus package, I'll lay the groundwork that, when we think about fighting hunger here in Texas, we're doing it directly and indirectly. And that indirect, from a food bank perspective, is those benefits that flow directly to the households. And the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, SNAP, is truly the best defense against hunger. And so we applaud the governor's efforts to give the maximum benefit to families through SNAP, and with this recent stimulus to give an extra 15% through to the summer in the SNAP benefit. That helps to pull those families out of those parking lots and into the grocery stores. That's, I think, the best thing that could be done. The startup of new federal programs like Farm to Families does create a lot of work. There's a lot of supply chain and logistics around those perishables. It's appreciated, but I would be one for taking those dollars, that $1.5 billion that was recently put into the Farm to Families Food Box Program, and invest that into SNAP. That removes us from the logistics. We don't have to stress our system any more than it's already stressed. It bolsters the economy, and it gets families into air-conditioned space, right? We were delivering a lot of food in the hot summer in parking lots throughout the state, and managing the temperature controls and all those logistics around handling the physical food is a challenge. Now, that's what food banks do, so don't get me wrong. But if you were to ask me, how would I prioritize? I would say SNAP is always the way to go.
Well, thanks, Eric. And I do want to talk more about the importance of SNAP as well as the other child nutrition programs out there. But I had one more question about sort of the impact that the pandemic had on sort of the distribution model, which is around volunteers. And Eric, you mentioned, needing to be out there in 100-degree temperatures. And I know at the same time, you lost a lot of your volunteers and a lot of your regular distribution partners, nonprofits, other food charities, churches, largely staffed by senior volunteers who really couldn't come out and safely continue to volunteer. And I know food banks had National Guard deployed to help with that. Can you speak to that a little bit, Catherine, the making up for the loss of volunteers and what you did differently and what role the Guard did play?
We had to do almost everything differently. We changed our entire distribution model, not only to meet the increased need, but excuse me, also to keep everybody safe. Excuse me. The National Guard was, an incredible blessing towards the beginning. The deployment probably made up half of our supplemental workforce. We also had to engage in partnerships with Harris County in order to their furloughed workers we were able to utilize for our distributions and also packing in the warehouse. So many of our partners had to shut down as well. We distribute a great deal of food through our partners. So those who were able to keep moving, we had to basically shift the structure of those distribution models. So where they were doing drive-through, home delivery, obtaining PPE. This is a 24-hour-a-day, 7-day-a-week business getting food to people, especially with the increased need. But yeah, the National Guard was a major benefit and resource. We've seen volunteers come up a little. We've put a lot of safety protocols in place, and people are a little more comfortable, but that's still a really great need for us, because that's how food banks operate. We don't have a huge staff. That's definitely not where our resources go.
Great. Well, it's good to hear that volunteers can come out and safely volunteer. That's a good message for people to take away. So I want to get back to talking about SNAP, which has always been a huge part of the anti-hunger ecosystem, probably our nation's backbone defense against hunger. I think food banks, in talking about sort of their role, often point out that for every meal that food banks put on the table, I think SNAP puts 9 meals on the table. So obviously always a really important program. Beth, can you talk a little bit about how SNAP became even more important and some of the things that y'all advocated for to increase its ability to feed just the huge volumes we're seeing, and specifically how do food banks engage in connecting people to SNAP?
Yeah, absolutely. And Eric, you did a great job teeing this up. So thank you for your primer on the importance of SNAP. I think we all agree it does keep people out of the food bank lines, and it is absolutely critical in helping us, meet the need. So I know all of our food banks operate a similar program. We have a social services department, and I can't sing their praises enough. Pre-COVID, and certainly can't even begin to describe the flexibility and the discipline that they've had in adjusting to this. It's full-time staff that all of us employ at the food banks. They help folks in the communities. Our social services team pre-COVID was out on the ground in all 21 counties that we serve, meeting with folks at various community centers and partner agencies, helping them with application assistance, be it for SNAP, be it, related to housing or healthcare needs. It's their full-time job. They're totally dedicated to assisting people. I had someone once tell me, who had been a SNAP recipient in the past, that It was easier to get a mortgage than to fill out a SNAP application. And so I think the work that they do it resonated a lot with me. The work that team does every day is critical. What was useful during COVID was the waivers and flexibilities that were put in place to allow them to do that telephonically and electronically, and through interactions like this. There was no longer that requirement that you had physically to be present with an applicant and get their signature on a piece of paper. That was able to be done electronically, telephonically. We still do see clients for those in Travis County who have know people in need that could use some application assistance. They can still make an appointment to come to our food bank. But the majority of what we're doing is fielding calls through a helpline. I think in our last fiscal year, we fielded almost 5,000 calls and referred about 2,500 people for assistance. And again, those flexibilities in that process, we couldn't have done it under the old model. They were critical.
Well, it's great to hear that there's help out there, because I think with the Biden administration's commitment to finding new ways to bolster that benefit, make sure everyone who needs it gets it, that it's adequate, that there's still going to be that question of how do I get connected? How do I apply? So it's good to hear that food banks are out there doing that good work. Obviously, child nutrition programs that help schools and child care centers and places like that, the school meal programs, summer food services are all really important as well. And I know food banks often are contractors to run those programs as well as partner with schools. But obviously, their programs set up to be, most of them delivered in a congregate setting, and that became really hard when schools shut down. So Catherine, can you talk a little bit about your work? I know Houston built immediate relationships with schools to try and help out with some of those challenges.
Yeah, thankfully we had good relationships prior to the pandemic. We have a backpack buddy program, for example, where we're making sure that after school children have food meals that they can take home. But yeah, once the pandemic hit, schools, even a school district as big as HISD, the Houston Independent School District, did not necessarily have the resources to get to thousands of kids we have 1,000 kids in one apartment complex, for example, who were doing virtual learning. So part of what we did is establish a home delivery program where they were getting 7-day boxes with some shelf-stable breakfast, frozen lunches. And we really we did an evaluation of that. It dramatically reduced food waste. Where kids were able to get exactly what they needed at their homes. That really benefited parents, particularly when the economy started to open and some parents were able to go back to work. They didn't have the flexibility in their schedules, or maybe didn't have transportation to go to a school that was providing even a drive-up delivery model. So home delivery has remained a major benefit. I will say that the congregate care waiver was a fantastic tool. I think the unintentional consequence of that was that non-school entities came in and were trying to fill in the gap. But unfortunately, once we got outside of the summer, those summer school options aren't allowed to operate in close proximity to schools. There's a lot of fear over duplicate meals and things of that nature. So I know we have lately been struggling to figure out how we help schools meet the need, because the assumption that they're able to, again, even a district as big and that has considerable resources like HISD cannot possibly get to all these children. And so we appreciate flexibility from USDA that doesn't always make it down to the ground level. So we've been really trying to work, particularly with HISD, to develop a MOU and really figure out where those pockets of need are, so that we can work together to fill them, because the Houston Food Bank has hundreds of non-school entities, as they call them, like the Boys and Girls Club, that are ready and willing to step in, but can't get reimbursed if they're found ineligible by TDA. So yeah, those school partnerships are absolutely essential, both for us and for the school districts trying to get to all these kids.
That's good to hear. I know, Beth, you've had some good experiences as well, trying to figure out how to address these challenges.
Yeah, I think, and Catherine, I think we all feel your pain with, there are pros and cons with all types of flexibilities, but honestly, I don't know that we would have been able to operate, our summer food service program at all from the food bank, and certainly without, our awesome partnership with AISD. I just think anecdotally, it's interesting. It might be interesting for people to know, the summer prior to COVID, that program, we were operating at about 94 sites, I believe, around Travis County and some surrounding counties, due to the geographic restrictions that Catherine referenced. That list of sites went down to about 11. And so we were pretty concerned, that we weren't going to be able to feed as many kids. And ultimately, that's what these programs are about, right? Maximizing impact and getting food to as many children as possible. Because of those flexibilities, waiving that congregate feeding requirement, allowing parents to come and pick up meals in bulk, we actually served, I think, 10,000 more meals at 11 sites than we did at 90 plus sites, under the old model. So I think it's, demonstrative of sometimes these waivers make a lot of sense, and, we just need to think through, some of the unintended consequences and adjust accordingly. That's the only thing I would add.
In some cases, some of the waivers could be turned into permanent changes. Like, we may have learned that something actually works better if we do it this way. The one benefit that we haven't mentioned that was put in place specifically to sort of address school closures and loss of school meals is the pandemic EBT benefit. So I wanted to make sure to mention that. That was first of a one-time benefit that went to families of kids enrolled in the free or reduced price lunch program whose schools shut down in the spring. And that was a benefit that got distributed this summer. And a second round of that benefit is expected to go out, was approved in the last stimulus bill passed in December. And I know the state is struggling to figure out how to make sure that that benefit gets out to the right people. So it's probably going to be another month or so before families see that. So I want to leave some time for questions, but I know we're also heading into a legislative session here in Texas, actually just started. We've talked a lot about the really important role that the federal nutrition safety net has played during the pandemic and will continue to play. Eric, given everything you've seen, what can food justice advocates do this session to kind of support an anti-hunger agenda at the legislature?
Well, there's lots that you could be doing. I think the very first stop is always feedingtexas.org to learn all about the great work that's happening throughout the state. But we've got some specific issues related to SNAP. The pandemic has impacted those that are most vulnerable, and those are our seniors. And the seniors need nourishment. They need access to good nutrition. And the SNAP program is typically not been as kind as it could to those seniors. Many of them struggle with the application and the online aspect of that. The frequency of renewal, even though their income doesn't change. And so, some SNAP simplification for seniors, I think, is critical. And, I know Feeding Texas is committed to be a big champion this session to see if we can make it easier for seniors to participate and maximize their monthly benefit. The other would be, really targeting college kids. There's some great models throughout the United States where in lieu of the work requirements, college kids sometimes are having their hands full with just pursuing their education or their vocational training. Many of them, get stuck in the intern rut and are just trying to get a job, but don't actually get a paycheck. And so looking at those work requirements for college kids to see what could be, maybe more impactful and more relative in today's economy where there is a true shortage of jobs. I know, states in some cases have allowed volunteerism to be substituted for the work requirements related to SNAP. And so I think those are a couple of big ones. Obviously, there's some real technical strategies that we've learned in COVID. How much we've purchased online, that self-service kind of portal, getting your goods and services delivered to your doorstep. The strategies around SNAP and online grocers has been incredible, but the opportunity to have an application that can be fully completed and not have to collect physical signatures, the opportunity for the state of Texas to move towards, a telesignature type platform where, call center staff can be able to really complete an application with a client that's eligible, rather than running through the old paper ways of the past. And so I think there's a lot that we need to be doing, but those are just a couple of things, and I'm sure you could add, Celia, to the list of things that we'd like to see happen this session.
Well, I think you did a great job summarizing the food bank's priorities, and I also want to mention that Feeding Texas is part of a coalition of groups around the state working on anti-hunger and food justice issues that's called the Texas Food Policy Roundtable. This is a very loosely organized coalition that Feeding Texas co-hosts with every Texan, and it's fairly broad-based. It includes children's advocates, anti-hunger advocates, food justice advocates, racial justice advocates, and public health advocates. And so we have a weekly call to update folks on what's going on with the legislative agenda in the legislature. We encourage anyone. We've got lots of Central Texas groups already engaged with us on that front. And so folks want to learn more and get involved, they can become part of that group, and they just reach out, contact me at Feeding Texas, and we can get people engaged in that work. So, well, I want to thank you all. You've been a great panel. I know we have some time left, and I'll just stop and see if we have questions from our audience that we can help answer. And I'm not sure how those questions will come to me, but I'm expecting them to show up in a chat box somewhere if we have any. So I'm not seeing anything.
Celia, while we're waiting for questions, I'll just quickly add on to what Eric was saying. We, even with, right now we're doing about 800,000 pounds of food per week. And even though we've been meeting that increased need, there is just no way that any food bank can completely solve that need. And that's why the systemic change that Eric was talking about is so critical, and we need everyone involved in that piece, and certainly the aspects that Eric mentioned, and then also I know you guys and every Texan are championing a bill to remove vehicle from the SNAP asset test. Anecdotally, this is what I hear most often is standing in the way where families have a car that runs, and that alone keeps them in that cycle of having to make decisions about not paying rent so they can eat, or not eating so they can pay rent. So we're hoping these kinds of systemic changes are really going to make a difference for families, even outside of pandemic times.
Thanks, Catherine. So we did have a question come in specifically about sort of how we address pre-existing inequities and gaps in the food system. I think everyone's not hoping just to go back to normal, but to go back to a new normal. And so the question really is, in addition to some of the priorities that Eric talked about, what are we going to be doing moving forward to make changes or have to, put in place service innovations to try and address some of those inequities? And I'll open that up and let any of you jump in.
I would just add.
Go ahead, Eric.
Go ahead.
No, I would highlight I think need for more efficient home delivery models. I think that's absolutely been brought to light, both with children, senior population. I know we had an earlier panel today, I believe, or maybe it's later this afternoon, talking about a partnership we developed through COVID with Cap Metro here locally, in getting groceries to folks who need it. So I think that model is certainly something that we are looking at. And it's above my pay grade to make these decisions, so I can't commit to anything, firmly. Sorry, Travis County folks, but yeah, I think that model in particular is something that we're analyzing closely.
We had another question too, that Eric, I was going to pitch to you, which was around our work with farmers and efforts to get fresh produce into the food supply. Can you talk a little bit about the work? I know San Antonio Food Bank in particular does a lot of work directly with farmers.
Yeah, I think it's probably one of the biggest misconceptions about food banks, because we oftentimes are asking for non-perishable food items to be donated in food drives. And so a lot of individuals assume we only handle non-perishable food, but I would say for most of the Feeding Texas food banks across the state, half of what, if not more, of what we handle is perishable. And a good mix, 25 to 40, 50% is fresh produce. And that's truly because of the work of Feeding Texas and support that we get through the Texas Department of Agriculture to work with a lot of Texas farmers that are growing crops that don't meet market specs, and to keep that produce from going to waste, offer it to food banks. And we're able to help the farmer in some of their costs, but then get that produce out to families. And, that's one of our, legislative issues and opportunities this session, is to make sure that the Texas legislature doesn't cut that funding, that they keep it at the amount needed to be able to sustain the program and sustain food banks with produce. There's just nothing better that we could be getting families than healthy produce. And so it's a real win-win for the Texas ag economy and for families that struggle to put food on the table.
We had speaking of healthy food, another question come in that Beth, I think I'll pitch to you, which is around sort of the nutrition density commitments that food banks have made. What standards do you have in place around the nutritional content and value of food that you distribute?
Yeah, and we absolutely, have an internal policy, that a certain percentage of whether it's now a pre-packed box or, products that we have available at a mobile distribution that in former times with walk-up certainly represented, protein, dairy, produce, as well as shelf-stable goods. Trying to think of how I want to say this. I think that there's a little bit of a shift in terms of the way we talk about things at the Central Texas Food Banks. We frame a lot of our conversation in terms of how many pounds we distribute, and I think we're moving more to speaking in terms of meals, because that really more accurately reflects a proper distribution and density as the question posed of what we're providing for families in need. So I think that would be my takeaway from that question is let's talk about meals instead of pounds, and I think then you get a more accurate depiction of the work that we do.
Thanks, Beth. Question came in about mobile farmers markets and what we think about that as a way to increase food access. I know, Eric, you've done some good work in that area.
Yeah, I think there's 4 big barriers to good nutrition. Income, how much you make determines how well you eat. Geography tends to dictate, do you have access to a grocery store? Are you living in a food desert? Education, do you know how to prepare food? Can you cook those vegetables into meals? And then just the commerce. A lot of food is marketed. Unfortunately, food that isn't very good for us is marketed the most, and sometimes is least expensive. And so for families that we serve, they're tempted by that food economy. And so if we're going to overcome those 4 barriers, I'd say number 1, we need to be advocating for sustaining livable wages, right? We've talked about this doubling of the demand, but I think we go back pre-COVID, and just for San Antonio, we were feeding 60,000 people a week with just a 2% unemployment rate. It's just wrong that people should be working and still be hungry. And we've got to do more to make sure families are stabilized, that they have access to their basic needs. Farmers markets are incredible ways to get, local agriculture to families. I think HEB does a great job of working through Texas farmers, and a lot of that same produce is available in great array at a great price. And I think it's ultimately about access, and do neighborhoods, proximity, all of that come into play. And how do you help with public transportation in parts of the state that just struggle, that they can't get to where the food is. So I mean, I think there's a lot there, but I think every little bit helps. And it's always about scaling, and can you do more to make sure people get access to good food.
Thanks, Eric. I'll pitch the final question to Catherine, because Houston, you represent obviously one of the most culturally diverse areas of the state, your service area. What are you doing around making sure that food is culturally responsive? I know you don't have complete control over what's donated, but how are you addressing that issue?
We are actually talking directly with the families that we serve. So whether it be our seniors or through our Backpack Buddy program, and asking families, what are the foods that you would like to be cooking? You can get, as you said, donations, get, hundreds of pounds of lentils, and, I don't know what to do with lentils. But families want to feel comfortable and want to be able to, to cook for themselves and their children. So we're doing a lot of surveying, and then looking if we can make direct asks for distributions that involve those various food groups.
Thank you. I think we're out of time. So good questions, great panel. Thank you all so much. This has been a good conference so far, and we're really honored to be a part of it, and look forward to working with all of our partners across the food justice movement to help people get through this time and beyond. So thank you all, and thank you to the audience.
Thanks, Celia. Thanks, Beth, Catherine.
I was like, I'm keep doing this much longer.
Oh, all right, y'all.
That was
To
great,
laugh.
Celia.
I'm like, what am I waiting for? Thank you all. That was great. You guys rock.
Yeah, you guys did awesome. And again, Celia, thanks for the tech. This was like the worst, one of the worst platforms.
Meanwhile, I'm sitting here like, where is everybody? And realize that I've completely disconnected myself in trying to help you connect. So just glad I made it.
We have to go. We have like 30 seconds of transition. So thank y'all.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Okay, bringing everyone up. Have to buy us a little bit more time. Howdy. Hello, everyone.
Hi.
Hello.
Raise your hand if you washed your hair today.
I did mine last night.
Fresh bud.
Hair in about 4 years. Okay, everyone, really quick. Did we lose somebody?
Yes, we lost Kim.
Okay, so just real quickly, let's wait for Sharon. There she goes.
Oh yeah, where's Michelle?
Okay.
We need
All right,
Michelle.
so really quickly, because we're about to go on, we're about to go live. So you see the live via RTMP on the top left.
Mm-hmm.
Who's our host, Kim? Okay, so when it goes